It's Thursday, November 14th, 2024. This is Ashton Ellett here with another installment of the Documenting Congress Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Tempe, Arizona with Mr. Edward Oetting. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, he earned a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Michigan, an MA in United States history from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and an MLIS from Wayne State University. He began his library's career at the University of North Dakota before moving to SUNY Albany, where he was university archivist and campus records officer. He joined the staff of the Arizona State University Libraries in 1983, where he led the Department of Archives and Manuscripts until 1996, when he became librarian for history and liaison librarian to the Barrett Honors College. He also served as the executive director of the Manuscript Society, an international organization devoted to the collection, preservation, use, and enjoyment of art, autographs, and manuscripts. In addition to his time at ASU and elsewhere, he was a founding member of the Congressional Papers Roundtable of the Society of American Archivists. Ed, thank you so much for agreeing to take some time out of your day and take a walk down memory lane.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very pleased to do it, Ashton, and hopefully I can remember a few things back that far, but I probably have a few stories that I can give you, some good and some bad.
Fantastic.
Not all good, actually.
And everything in between.
Yes, there you go.
So you grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
Yes.
Tell me about growing up in Detroit and how you went from there to libraries.
I grew up in the city. Detroit was very different back in this. I'm old. I was born in 1950, and my parents moved to Detroit when I was born in New Rochelle, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents moved to Detroit when I was 6 weeks old.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in Detroit off and on until 1976, when I moved to when I got my first full-time job at the University of North Dakota. But my parents lived in an area called the Indian Village, which will mean nothing to anyone other than a Detroiter. Very near Belle Isle, which also probably means nothing, but Belle Isle, interestingly, it is literally an island in the Detroit River, and it's I think it's the second largest park. It was designed by, and you probably remember, the same man that designed Central Park in New York.
Frederick Law.
Yes,
Olmsted.
Frederick Law Olmsted. It was designed by Olmsted. And when I was 13, my parents moved to a Detroiter would say one of the close eastern suburbs, because it was actually Grosse Pointe,
Mm-hmm.
and Grosse Pointe has connotations, particularly from Michigan, that probably are both true and untrue. But it wasn't as rich as everyone thinks it was. But it's the closest suburb to Detroit, to eastern Detroit. And
Okay.
Detroit, like many very large cities, is basically two cities. Eastern Detroit, East Detroit, which is east of Woodward Avenue, and anything west of Woodward Avenue, which is the main street that divides downtown. Anyway, that's probably more than anybody wanted to know about Detroit.
Journey led me to believe that there's a South Detroit. Is there a
No, actually, that's a great Wyandotte. Wyandotte is south. Is the well, actually, and then the other thing. South Detroit is basically Windsor.
You're right, Windsor, Ontario.
Windsor,
right.
Ontario. But Wyandotte is probably what, if you have any Wyandotte e-course, if you have a South Detroit, but Detroiters always refer to that as downriver.
Okay. So what did your parents do?
My father was a surgeon.
Okay.
Doctor/surgeon. My mother was traditional in some ways. Mother, housekeeper. My mother's actually English and never became an American citizen.
Was this a wartime?
My parents met in Salisbury, England. Dad as I said, a surgeon in the doctor in the U.S. Army, and my mother was a volunteer nurse.
Okay.
And interestingly, my grandparents, my mother's parents, my grandparents met in World War One. My grandmother is from Newfoundland, and which when it was still a colony, and my grandfather's from England, and they met in France. My grandfather was an ambulance driver and for the British Army, and my grandmother was a volunteer nurse from Newfoundland.
Oh, wow.
So both wars brought my family together.
There you go.
But yeah, my mother never became an American citizen.
Any reason for that?
So she, in her later years, denied that she ever said this, but I know she did. Someone once asked her, her name was Adina, but most her friends called her Dee, and someone asked her, one of her friends said, Dee, why didn't you ever become an American citizen? And her response was, my dear, why would I?
How positively English.
Yes, but my mother's first cousin Rachel, who was a doctor, an internist, all moved to Detroit from England, but she had to become an American to practice, a U.S. citizen to practice in the U.S. at that time.
Interesting.
Yeah,
certainly not the way in the medical profession.
Yeah, probably not.
For the best.
Yeah,
of course. So tell me about how your love of history and libraries, did that come from your childhood experiences, or is this something that just sort of happened?
I always loved history,
Okay.
and from I think 7th grade on, I always had history classes, and then in high school I had AP classes, and I knew I wanted to be a history major. Don't know why, and but I did.
Right.
I will say what's interesting. What I really knew, the only thing I really knew, is that I wanted to be in academia.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be in the ivory tower. I'm fine with the ivory tower. As you well know, it is a life unlike the real world, and I'm fine with that. That's all I ever wanted to do, is either go to or work at a university, and I accomplished that. I started at University of Michigan as an undergraduate, 1968. And
as we said, a very boring year on
college
right.
Campuses. Yes, and continuously from '68 till I retired in 2001, I either went to or worked at a university: Michigan, University of Illinois, Wayne State University, University of North Dakota, SUNY Albany, and Arizona State.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, exactly. And retired from there, and I am a emeritus librarian emeritus. And you'll probably know this. ASU library, this is obviously inside library speak, it's not a tenure track position. It is continuing appointment with rank.
Don't I know it?
Okay, and I obviously had continuing appointment, and I was a full librarian. So,
well, your love of history, was this American history or anything you could consume?
Pretty much anything. I ended up at Illinois focusing on American history only because I won't say it's not that it's easier, but there's only back then there's only 200 years you got to worry about. And I was interested, and it was interesting. I did not pursue a PhD, I was in programs at Illinois, SUNY Albany, and at ASU, but didn't obviously finish. But if I had pursued it, it would have been at Illinois, and it would have been in a period that doesn't exist anymore. back then my area of interest was the Jacksonian period,
No, yes.
which you're no longer allowed to even talk about.
The Jacksonian period. That's
Jacksonian period, and my advisor would have been Robert Johansson,
Uh-huh.
who wrote
Yep.
the seminal biography of Stephen A. Douglas.
Stephen A. As an Illinoisan.
Yes, you would.
Yes.
Yes.
The little giant.
Yes. So Professor Johansson, great faculty member, really interesting.
So, walk me through your path from history education to libraries.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I got my MA from Illinois in 72, and is that right? Yeah, 72, and didn't go, as I said, did not pursue the PhD. Went back home to Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
and in 1972 in Detroit, there were no jobs in anything, basically. And I had worked in the summers, it's sort of a long story, sharpening saws at Saw Sharpening Service.
Well, I mean, the name says it all.
And the reason, I was terrible at it, but the reason why is the owner was Sicilian, and both he and his wife, particularly his wife, had been patients of my father, and the owner felt that my father had saved his wife's life in surgery, and so there was like this blood debt to hire this kid that really didn't know anything about anything, was terrible at sharpening saws. But anyway, I worked at Saw Sharpening Service for 2 summers, and then when I came home from graduate school, worked for about a year, again, a pity hire, and during that time I realized, by this time I was married, 74, and I realized I didn't want to sharpen saws for the rest of my life, and like many librarians, my father's sister, my Aunt Gertrude was a librarian. She founded the Allegheny County Library for Allegheny Community College, set up the library. She was a librarian, and like many librarians, proto-librarians, well, I like books, I like libraries, and Wayne had and has a library school, and it probably was one of the very few library schools in the country that you could pursue the degree at night.
Okay.
And so I was still working at Saw Sharpening Service, and I would finish, it was a full-time job, and I would finish at 5 or whatever and get in my 64 Ram Dodge Dart and drive down to downtown Detroit, which in the 70s was interesting. So for the first, I think, full year, or certainly for the certainly into the spring semester of 75, I just had classes in the library school. And Wayne, as you well know, as one of the premier and earliest archival programs,
Mm-hmm.
full archival programs in the country, again led by Dr. Mason, who I've always considered my mentor, and but the classes were only during the day, so my wife Grace at the time was working in the financial aid office at Wayne, and she said, "Oh, did you realize that there are actually graduate scholarships that will give you money toward tuition?" And no, I didn't. And so I applied, and I was able to get graduate scholarship that paid at least the tuition, and was able to switch to classes during the day, and take the 3. Wayne was on quarters at the time, 3 quarters for the archival program, and
What did the archival program entail back then?
Well, good question. It was, I mean, obviously lectures by Dr. Mason, basically seminars. I think there were 15 or 16 people in my class, and at Wayne, you didn't have to do a master's thesis, but you did have to do a project.
Okay.
And my project was processing the papers of UAW Local 580, I think, which was the UAW local in Dallas, Texas.
Interesting.
And I processed. That was part of my. That was my master's project, and before I got the job at UND, I was for about 6 weeks the AFSCME archivist.
The
American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees.
Employees.
Exactly. Yeah, and also for some reason I had something to do. I don't really remember why. With Wayne also had the UFW Farm Workers papers and had this great oral interview with Cesar Chavez.
Really, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a great. I don't know whether it's open, but if you have any interest in that, they have a great interview with Cesar Chavez.
So you hit the job market pretty quickly after getting your
Well, I got 76. So basically, I was at Wayne 75, 76, and as I said, Dr. Mason basically got me the job at the University of North Dakota as assistant curator of manuscripts and university archivist.
So what did that job entail? That sounds like you had a lot on your plate as a
like any archival job, the shops are small. So it was there were two professionals, myself and the curator Dan Rylance, who again, we were speaking of the Nonpartisan League and Democratic Party. I got there in early October of 76, and within 4 weeks he was elected to the state legislature on the Democratic Nonpartisan League ticket, and said, I'm leaving January 1st for 3 or 4 months, you're in charge. So I was in charge I was acting curator from my second or third month at UND.
How big were the holdings back
Good.
then?
It was a good sized collection, as I said. I would say probably around 5,000 feet.
Okay, well,
Maybe more. Their main collections, they had Senator Langer's papers, Senator Lemke's papers. These are huge NPL people. Senator Milton Young, who moved the Republican Party from really progressive to conservative in the late 40s, early 50s, which is where it is now. And then they had both of the Burdicks, Usher and Quentin. These were all old NPLers, but they were all Republicans. So I would say the bulk of the senatorial collections were probably at least 3,000 or 4,000 feet.
oh wow.
Yeah, it was a good sized collection.
So, essentially the preponderance of
I would say the
holdings.
majority. Again, this is my memory, which very well could be wrong, but good sized congressional. So I basically, from the beginning of my full-time professional career, was working with congressional papers.
Now, did any congressional collections come in to North Dakota while you were there?
I don't remember. I don't remember. I do remember Dan telling me the story of, I think it was the Langer papers. One of the they were all large collections. I think it was Langer, which was about, that alone was 500 or more feet. And basically, he got a call that the papers were coming to UND, and meet him at the loading dock, and it was 3 semi-truckloads full of papers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So again, I may be wrong on my number, but I do remember the several semi trucks.
It would not be unusual
No.
for the time.
Yeah.
For that to happen.
Yeah, and that could have been the young. I don't remember which one, but it was one of the collections anyway. Now I forgot what you were.
No. What I was going to say is you made the jump from North Dakota to Albany.
Yeah.
SUNY Albany. Was that just an opportunity for career advancement, or was this
Yes.
like, I have to get out of North Dakota? No
Yes.
offense to everybody in North Dakota.
Yeah. I used to say, UND is a really nice school, and Grand Forks was all right. I used to say that UND would be a great university if you could move it 2,500 miles in any direction except north. But North Dakota was an experience. But it's a good school. UND was it was a good place to start. It was a good library, strong library, and a good university. And so to go back just very briefly, so one of the first things I had to do when I was acting curator and university archivist is at UND, I think, I may get the date exact wrong, but February 12th or somewhere in that area was Founders Day.
Okay.
Somewhere in February, and in January, the president's office called over and said, "We want an exhibit for our Founders Day dinner." And so I had to put together an exhibit on the history of UND after having been there for two months tops. But it was one of my
best way to learn is to
exactly, and it was one of the things that I learned, as I'm sure you know, in university archives, is that when you're told to do something by the president's office, you can then tell everyone else, okay, I really need you to do this because this is for the president's office. And that was a lesson well learned, and as I'm sure you know, generally that's what happens.
It's like the one thing that has to happen.
When the president's office wants something done, then generally it gets done.
Yes, and relatively quickly.
And again, when I got the job at ASU, it was during one of their regular hiring freezes, and mine was one of only 2 jobs, I think, on campus at the time that was allowed to be hired, because at that time one of my responsibilities was be curator of the Arizona Historical Foundation, whose largest collection, founder, and director was Barry Goldwater.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And so I was one of, I think, 2 people allowed to be hired during a very solid freeze. And
Senator
one of the
Goldwater would like that to happen.
Yeah, and he did, yes. And yeah, he was an interesting person.
Well, we'll talk about Senator Goldwater, but the transitioning from North Dakota to Albany, what sort of change in your job responsibilities or
well,
evolution
the main change was basically having to deal with the differences. As you know, in our profession, my former profession, the term archivist and curator or manuscript curator are used interchangeably. They're not even close to interchangeable. And SUNY Albany had a separate special collections, and the University Archives was a true University Archives and records officer.
Right.
So it had no manuscript collections. It was
It was all record groups.
it was the archivist, university archivist for SUNY Albany. And so, as you know, that is a big difference. I mean, I'd done archives at UND, but not to the degree, and had not done any records management.
Well, which one's better, Ed? Manuscripts or records management?
They're so different. I mean, as someone with a history background, manuscripts is probably more interesting. But archives is more. It's a good question. Archives is more what the profession is. Again, if you say you're an archivist, that has an actual meaning, as opposed to a curator of manuscripts. A curator of manuscripts is really a special collections librarian that deals with manuscripts.
Right.
Whereas an archivist is not a librarian.
That is correct.
In fact, I have an article on that very point.
We would say it goes without saying, but
Yeah.
it's said all the time.
It does not go without saying. But as I said, I wrote an article for the Journal for Library Administrators. I can't remember the name of it. That very point, the difference between training for an archivist and a librarian. Oh, I know what it was called. Was it? I think it was called "Why Can't We Call Them Librarians" or something like that. Yeah. And yes. So, but anyway, there is a big difference, and I'm not even sure it's always understood in the archival profession. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's something that always goes, and especially when you fold in, folks like me who are trained historians.
Yeah.
Who are later certified archivists.
Yes.
Working in a library.
Yes.
That,
absolutely.
Oh
yeah.
I have to explain that all the time at the holidays. And what is it you do? You're a
Yeah.
librarian. It's like, no. But
and actually at ASU, there had been a university archivist. And so there was an actual archival rank, but I was able to get it into the bylaws for the library, that it actually put in the requirements for what it meant to be to be ranked as an archivist. And we had one of the reasons being we had several professionals that did not have MLSs. But were able to be were able to be ranked as archivists. And so, right. Yeah. So I'm believe me, very well familiar with that.
Long before the time of the Academy of Certified Archivists, which wasn't until, I guess, late 80s.
I'm a grandfathered one of the original certified archivists, actually.
As is my boss, Cheryl Vogt, University of Georgia. One of the grandfathered in, and Deborah Skaggs.
Didn't have to take the test.
Nope, I had to take the test.
Yeah, a lot. I know. My one of my archivists that worked for me, several of them I think had to take the test.
Which I'm primarily oral history, acquisitions, development. And most of the test is processing.
Yeah.
So that was like,
I taught archives management at 2 years at SUNY Albany in the library school, or was it 3 years? I don't know. I taught in the library school at SUNY Albany, archives and manuscripts, and 2 years at ASU in the history department.
Well, it is good experience if you work in a more diversified shop like at a larger university.
Right.
You then know how your work can impact all the other units of the archive. So it is a good thing.
So you mentioned Department of Archives and Manuscripts, which is no longer called at ASU. It's Special Collections. I don't remember what it's called, but anyway. When I started there, as I said, I started my job. I was hired as curator of the Arizona Collection and the Arizona Historical Foundation. the director, when I was there, that hired me was a man by the name of Don Riggs, great librarian. Unfortunately, he's passed away while I was in the early 90s, I think, or mid 90s. Anyway, so I was hired that as curator of manuscripts or curator of Arizona Collection, Arizona Historical Foundation. But obviously Don knew that I had a background in university archives and records management. The university archivist, who had been a former registrar of the university and was made archivist in the 70s, and resigned rather abruptly, and so within, I think, 2 months of my arriving at ASU, which also was in October, Don made me the university archivist and records officer, and
with a commensurate pay raise, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then within about 2 or 3 years of that, that also included what was called the Chicano Collection. The Chicano, it was originally called the Chicano Studies Collection, and then I wanted it to be a more manuscript oriented, and very fortunate to have a staff member. Was the first person who was able to get to be an archivist, Chris Marine, who's very well known in Chicano Studies there at Chicano History, and she became the curator of the Chicano Research. I think we changed the name to Chicano Research Collection, and also then acquired the Labriola National American Indian Center or something like that, which is still in existence and also has a curator who's, from what I understand, is doing a great job. Alex Soto, S-O-T-O. I forget what tribe he's a member of, but he is a native. And so I was curator of manuscripts, or curator of the foundation, curator of the collection, university archivist, head of Labriola, and something else. Anyway, and I said, I can't just. It was too long to put on my signature at the end. So I said, all right, let's just call it Archives and Manuscripts. So and as you can imagine, it's initials of DAM, so it became the damn department. So anyway, that's how it became Archives and Manuscripts.
So needless to say, you were not exclusively a congressional
No,
papers archivist.
no. By the time I was at ASU, I was an administrator.
You were
was
an administrator.
Yeah.
So what was your contact then with congressional papers when you were at ASU?
Significant, somewhat. Interestingly, because I didn't know Arizona history at all, and the most important collection we had, in my opinion, to this day, was the papers of Carl Hayden.
Right.
And probably the most powerful legislator in the 20th century that no one outside of Arizona knows who he is.
And this is the Democratic, was he
Democrat.
the leader?
He was he was President Pro Tem.
Okay.
He was at one point chair of appropriations, rules, and there was another one. So basically he controlled appropriations, what offices all the senators got, and who got hired by the Senate.
And whatever got to the floor.
And yeah, and it's through. So my first exposure to the congressional office, records office, and meeting Dick Baker was when I was at North Dakota.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think So I think it was when I was at North Dakota, and then I stayed in touch with them, just often just like emails or whatever when I was at Albany, but obviously had no congressional collections. And then when I moved to ASU with significant congressional collections, I got back in touch with the office and what was it? Richie.
Don. Yeah.
Don and Dick Baker and what was her name?
Karen Paul.
Yes, yes. So I knew all of them, and had stayed in touch, and then got back in touch when I was at ASU. And so to get back to Hayden, the way I sort of learned about Arizona or certain political history was I actually went through all 700 boxes of the Hayden papers, just sort of seeing what was in them.
Ooh.
And well,
Diving in head first.
it wasn't as difficult as it sounded, but it was fascinating. And I don't know, the last year, one of the last years I was there, 2019. Yeah, my last year, full year at ASU, just before the pandemic, we got a small seed grant from the state. The NHPRC has each state has, I forget what they're called, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
We got a grant.
I don't know what it's called either. So
Yeah.
That's why I'm nodding along.
Yeah. We got a grant to put on a...
Is it Megara? Is that what? Nah, that'd be Records Group. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. Records, Arizona State Historical Records Office or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, we got a small grant to put on a conference at the Grand Canyon to commemorate in February of 2019 the 100th anniversary of the creation of Grand Canyon National Park as a national park.
Okay.
It was not a national park until 19.
Really?
And Hayden was the legislative sponsor in the House, because he was in the House at that time. And I think Ashcroft and Garvey, the senators, were in the Senate were the sponsors. But anyway, so we put together a conference on that. We actually have the proceedings of it, and I spent about 6 months doing archival research, which was fantastic,
Right.
in the Hayden papers on the creation of the park.
Back to your roots as a historian.
Yes. And there's actually, I can give you the link. I think it's called, there's a nice site that's still on ASU Library site called 100 Years of Grand.
Nice.
If you have any interest in the Grand Canyon, take a look. And it's got historical photographs. We put about, Rob Spindler, who you, I'm sure know of, was still working, I think he was still a university archivist, and so Rob and I worked together on that. Also with Peter Runge, head of special collections at at NAU.
Okay, yeah, Northern Arizona.
Yeah, and so we put together a conference on the 100th anniversary of the creation of Grand Canyon National Park, which Hayden was very much involved with.
Sure.
And also, he was also very much involved with, most people don't realize that probably the most famous trail is the Bright Angel Trail.
Mm-hmm.
It was a toll road until 2026. And it was a toll road owned by Senator Ralph Cameron, who Republican.
2026 or 1926?
1926.
Okay.
1926. It was at one point owned by Cameron, who was the senator, Ralph Cameron, Republican senator from Arizona. And then Hayden defeated Cameron in 26, and 26 was when it became just part of the park and not a toll road.
So took his office and took his road.
Yeah, with him. Yeah, well, he didn't take it with him, but yes, it was
Elections have
interesting.
consequences,
Yes,
as they say.
yes, exactly.
So, in addition to the Hayden collection, which as you've explained, is this very large, important
Right.
collection, what other because there's University of Arizona, just down the road, 100 or so miles in Tucson, that has a relatively large collection
Yeah.
of congressional papers, and so who was giving to Arizona State versus, say, the flagship? Arizona,
Well,
down in Tucson?
obviously Hayden.
Mhm.
In the Congress, well, in the foundation side, Goldwater.
Right.
Also, I can't remember his name, who was senator after Goldwater when Goldwater ran for president.
Oh yeah, the guy who there.
He's
66.
Republican. I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
And
he wasn't there very long.
no, those papers were there. On the collection side, Hayden, John Rhodes,
Mm-hmm.
Eldon Rudd, Bob, can't remember, Stump, Robert Stump, Congressman Stump, John McCain. Those are the ones that, I don't know who they've gotten since
Sure.
yeah, but that's a lot of stuff.
So were these people who, generally speaking, had ties to ASU, or were more like Phoenix Valley
Yes.
centric? Both.
Mostly Phoenix Valley centric.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why the Udall papers are obviously in Tucson,
That's right.
which is their largest collection.
Right.
I think.
Mo and
Although
Mo
and that's why DeConcini's papers are down there.
Mhm.
Again, as you I'm sure know, there is a huge split, dichotomy, whatever you want to call it, between Tucson and Phoenix.
I can understand.
Yeah.
I made the drive yesterday.
Yes.
There is a yawning gap between,
Yes,
between the
yes,
two.
there is.
So not unlike Illinois, where
Yeah.
Chicago and
Well,
everybody
it was very
else,
much
and,
like North Dakota between Grand Forks and Fargo.
just a different
Size.
order of magnitude.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So
But not order of difference in terms of the importance in the state.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Goldwater collection
Mhm.
is sort of unique in that it technically belonged to, as you said, the Arizona Historical
Foundation.
Society.
Well, technically, the foundation was separate.
I remember when I was trying to do my research
Yeah.
into the Republican
It was
Party.
at ASU, but not part of ASU.
Right. So how did that work, functionally speaking?
Okay, there were two separate reading rooms. It was all on the fourth floor of Hayden Library. Well, fifth floor that became the fourth floor. The top floor.
Okay.
As you well know, most archives are either on the top floor or in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the case everywhere I worked. UND's was on the top floor, and then the archives at SUNY was in the basement, and then at ASU top floor. And in fact, now I think Special Collections is on there. It's not in the basement; it's on their main floor.
Hey, Russell Library, when it opened, was actually in the sub-basement. So they went all over.
Yes, been there, been to sub basements before. Believe me. At Albany, we had so you mentioned the campus. The campus is it's one huge building basically.
Okay.
That's separated by because it's in Albany. It's there are tunnels that go. It's in basically this huge square that go all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get on campus in the winter, you don't have to go outside.
And it's a big concrete
And
facade.
right,
It's very
yes,
gray.
and the tunnels are in the sub basement.
Mm-hmm.
And at Albany, I had a storage unit for university records in the sub-basement. So I'm very familiar with. So anyway, I forget. Oh,
Well, we were
so
talking about
the
two
so the
reading,
foundation
yeah.
again founded by the senator and at ASU and had ASU supplied staff, but was not part of the university or the university library, and had his own collection policy and did whatever want. But obviously very similar collections. It had a book collection, had a ephemeral collection,
Yeah.
photographic collection, and manuscript collection.
Did this arrangement continue because of the senator, or was this sort of
Continuum. What do you mean by continuum?
them being separate bodies with it? So close.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why it was
or
separate.
institutional inertia, I suppose,
Yes.
could also be another
Yeah.
explanation.
Before I was there, it was founded by a man by the name of Bert Fireman, who was an Arizona historian and I think a close friend of the senators. And one of the collections that the foundation had, I believe, were the papers of Congressman Shattuck, whose father, Stephen Shattuck, was the co-wrote or ghosted or whatever Conscience of a Conservative.
Right, with Elbrint Bozell.
Yeah, and was obviously a political advisor to Senator Goldwater.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe Congressman Shattuck's papers are also at the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Or
I could look back at my dissertation. I believe it. I believe so. I believe so.
And so anyway, now I lost. I lost track of where I was going.
Basically, talking about how these parallel organizations, they're operating together but separate.
Right.
And then your role is some sort of I assume a go-between or a liaison.
Interestingly, again, I mentioned I was talking with Peter Runge, that had a special collections at Northern Arizona University, and they have a similar situation in the sense that the Northern Arizona branch of the Arizona Historical Society is at NAU, and it's in the facility in the NAU library, but it is not part of NAU. It is run by the Historical Society. So that is a very similar situation in that sense. Two collections, two with similar, almost identical in some ways, collecting areas, but separately administered.
Okay. So when you started at ASU, this would have been 83?
83, yeah.
So Senator Goldwater was still in office.
Yes.
So tell me about meeting Barry Goldwater. Or excuse me, Senator Goldwater.
Senator Goldwater. Again, fascinating individual. Very much like his image. I mean, very, upfront, crusty, I guess,
Rough.
Just said what, spoke his mind, and, you knew where he stood, basically. And but Senator Goldwater had an incredible love for Arizona and Arizona history, and saved. The reason why he founded the foundation was that he basically saved a lot of early Arizona history because no one else was doing it. And there are stories of some of the things that he was able to get. My recollection is, again, I could be wrong, but he had saved, because I think they had been tossed, transcripts from the OK Corral shootout trial At one point, I think they were in the foundation.
Oh, when they charged herbs.
Yeah.
And holiday.
From Tombstone County or
Wow.
whatever.
Cochise.
County, yeah.
Cochise.
Yeah. My memory's a little bit.
No,
I think
You're
that's
good.
my memory of that was there. But anyway, Senator had a incredible love for the state of for Arizona and its history, and as I'm sure you know, was a very well known photographer.
Yes.
And in fact, when the first time I went to his house up on the mountain, he was, and I think he went down to U of A, but he was basically closing his darkroom. And the first time I went to, I forget the name of the house, but anyway, first time I went up there on the mountain, he had decided to move most of his library to the foundation.
Okay.
And I was literally sitting sitting on the floor, in his living room with bookcases, and he's the senator, yeah, take that, I don't, yeah, all that goes. And I pulled out, I'll never forget this story. I pulled out a copy of R.N., the autobiography of Richard Nixon, and it was signed to my dear friend Barry. I'm paraphrasing, but to my dear friend Barry, who's this, that, and thus and so, and Dick Nixon or whatever signed. And I said, Senator, this is President Nixon's autobiography signed. Do you want to keep that? Oh, son of a bitch! I don't know. That guy, what he did to his wife was terrible. He was terrible. I mean, he went on, and again, probably don't quote me on that one, but yeah, he was not a fan, at least at that moment, of President Nixon. As you probably know, the three people that went to the White House, two of them were from Arizona. Mm-hmm. Congressman Rhodes, Senator Goldwater, and Hugh Scott. Mm-hmm. And they were the ones that made that fateful. And both the collection and the foundation had pictures. That picture of them, those three men walking up, because the Rhodes papers were in the collection and the Goldwater papers were in the foundation. John Rhodes was I really liked him. Just a nice, great politician.
Now, he's one I have. I don't have much knowledge of John Rhodes.
Really,
yeah.
He's again, and similar to Senator Hayden, supposedly the story was whether Hayden said this originally or whomever said this. The story was Hayden supposedly said, when asked about how did he work with Senator Goldwater, and said, there's a show horse and a workhorse. Mm-hmm. And he was the workhorse. And in fact, I got to know, I don't think the senator told me this, I got to know Judy Eisenhower, who was married to the nephew of President Eisenhower, I can't remember, Milton Eisenhower.
Yes.
And Judy was Senator Goldwater's chief of staff, AA or whatever the AA
administrative assistant.
Yes, and she was I think they're still alive, but very nice person. And so I got to know her a little bit, and I remember once going to Washington and sitting in the office, or I came in and Judy and there was two people waiting to see the senator. Obviously, with the three-piece suits, they're most likely lobbyists of some kind, and I think been waiting a while, and Judy came out and said, "Oh, come on, Ed, come on in to the office, and they can stay here. They can wait for him." And anyway, but a very nice person. Got to know. a little bit, and again, Earl, not Miller, Earl. That was again. I assume they're still alive. Very nice people. Earl had been the director of the foundation after Bert Fireman,
Okay.
who started it, and then Bert Fireman, and then when I was there, the director was executive director was Dean Smith, who had been at ASU for many years.
Okay.
So anyway, I've lost my train of thought.
So you mentioned going to Washington. Was that a regular trip for? I mean,
I won't say regular. I would basically go a couple times. I did go on for specific reasons, through the university. But as you well know, often there's conferences and whatever in D.C. And so if I were going to a library conference or an archival conference in D.C., I would make stops at.
Sure.
What we did, one of the things that, and this was actually as I sort of my last official act before I moved over to the library side, we arranged through, and I have many stories, I got to be good friends with Roy Elson,
Okay.
who you probably know the name. He was Hayden's AA, and at one point it was often called the 101st senator, because the senator was getting up there in years, and
They do
Roy
that.
Roy ran the office basically, and again the senator had so much influence and power that he was often referred to as the 101st senator. But got to know Roy, wonderful person, incredible stories. But anyway, now I forgot. Again, I lost track.
Well, no. Yeah.
Oh, and the way I met,
Yeah,
to get back
DC.
to Congressional Papers, the way I met Roy is I had a meeting in D.C. and I dropped in at Dick Baker's office, and it was either Dick or Don Ritchie. And I said, we're trying to get a hold of Roy Elson because we've heard that he still has some stuff, Hayden stuff. And I said, do you have any idea how to get a hold of Roy? He said, yeah. This was in Dirksen. He's in the office like 2 doors down, because he was doing he had gotten back to getting a job with the Senate, and he was he was either editing or putting together the most recent iteration of Senate rules.
Oh,
like
wow.
400, 500 page, and he was editing and putting that together. And he said, "Yeah." Or I think Don or Dick Baker said, "Yeah, I'll call." Just literally, he was like two offices down, and so I popped in and introduced myself, and
What are the odds?
yeah, and got to know Roy very well, and got to be, I think, good friends with him, and stayed with them. He ended up in Sonoyta, and lovely wife, I think it was Mary Jo, and I stayed with him a couple times down there, and had some great stories. I'll tell you my one favorite story of Senator and Roy. This was his last year, his last term, the senator's last term, and it probably was 62. His last term was 62, and retired in obviously 69. He was first elected to the Senate. At one point, had been the longest serving senator. He was elected in 26.
Okay.
And served until 72.
That's
73.
And then Richard Russell became President Pro Tem. After,
Yeah.
Hey, this
Yes.
is okay. It's all coming together.
Yes. And so this is my favorite story. Roy complained that the senator would never take junkets. As
Codels.
yeah, is that what they're called?
Yes,
Yeah.
congrats. Yes.
Yes, and he finally, the way Roy told it, he finally convinced the senator to lead the congressional delegation to the Paris Air Show, which I guess is the premier junket or whatever they're called.
Congressional delegation.
Yes,
Codel.
yes, was at that time and may still be one of the premier
Yeah.
trips that you could get, and he was able to get the senator, who was at that time President pro tem of the Senate, on this junket. So anyway, so they get there. So it would have been, I think, in '62, or it was during that term, and so they were in Paris, and it was during the time that, and I forget which pope it was. It might have been John 23, but whichever pope it was died.
It would have been Paul VI.
Was it? Okay. Whichever one died in that time period, as it turned out, Senator Hayden was the highest ranking U.S. official in Europe. And so he and Roy were sent to Rome to represent the U.S. delegation, to head the U.S. delegation at the funeral of the Pope. And it was it must have been '62, because it was during the time he was, the senator was running for his last term. And one of the things that Roy was most concerned, Roy was his campaign manager as well as his AA, was his age and the perception that the senator was too old to have another term. So anyway, so they're in the Curia, wherever it is that the funeral is held, with the College of Cardinals. So there he's in with the College of Cardinals, and the way Roy described it, it was a small area, very hot, incense, and it was the first time that the funeral had been televised worldwide, and so it was so. So Roy was very concerned about how the image, and Roy said that what happened was, because it was so hot, the senator kept nodding off a little bit, and every time he nodded, and the cameras were right on him, and so every time he nodded off, Roy would jab the senator in the ribs, and Hayden would do this, and I think he did this like 2 times. And then the 3rd time he did it, in Roy's telling, the senator said, "Young man," and Roy said he knew that he was in trouble. If the senator called him young man, if you do that one more time, you will be maybe flying back, if you're lucky, to the United States by yourself. And if you were as smart as you thought you were, you'd notice that half the College of Cardinals is asleep in front of me. So anyway, that was one of my favorites.
Hayden's senator was probably one of the younger.
Well, he was in his 80s at that point. He died in his early 90s, and one of the interesting, to sort of go back to Goldwater et al., is that the senator's funeral was held at Gamage Auditorium on ASU's campus, and it was the eulogies were presented by Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson, and it was the last time the 2 men had ever been on the stage together, or were on the stage together, and Johnson died within months of the funeral.
73?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. Yeah, that was for a time there were no living presidents, with the exception of with Nixon being.
ASU's archives has great photographs of that.
I'm sure
of that funeral.
So right around this time, 1984, sort of bringing this together, you work in congressional papers in D.C. Is the meeting of the congressional papers, well, at the time, roundtable, it's now a full-fledged section and everything. Tell me about your impetus for participating and joining that.
My recollection is, which is really, I think I have a paper somewhere on this, but I don't know where they are. But my recollection is I was either moderating or giving a paper at SAA on congressional papers. And at the same time, I think myself and several others of the panelists said, there really should be a roundtable at SAA for congressional papers. And I can't remember whether we had a rump meeting or whatever, but I believe we did submit, and I can't remember whether I was on it or not, but I know a request was submitted to SAA to make it, it was a roundtable and then to make it a section. Mm-hmm. But it came out of this paper, a conference, a panel session on congressional papers at SAA, and I don't remember which one it was at, to be honest.
Well, tell me,
and then again, and I was involved in that because I was involved in SAA. I was active to a degree, but not overly active.
Well, I mean, it's like, you still see this divide in professional associations, the East Coast schools. And
right.
This is a big country.
Yeah. Yes.
And travel is expensive.
Yeah.
And that's why every once in a while the conference will be in California, and the other time it'll be in Washington, D.C.
This is not connected to SAA or the Congressional Papers Roundtable, but one of the things that I did while I was still at ASU and still active with manuscripts and congressional papers is that I put together a NHPRC grant to have basically a pilot project for appraising and evaluating congressional papers within a state, and coming up with collection development guidelines on what institution would take which papers from a congressman, and working with, at that time, we were working with the 3 universities that had congressional papers in Arizona. I was in Washington, I can't remember why, and while the grant was being discussed at the NHPRC, they have that open session or whatever, with when the liaisons on their board, congressional liaisons were there, and I was with, I don't remember who it was, but my contact at NHPRC said, "Well, why don't you come to the session, and they'll be discussing your grant." And he was very positive about it. He thought it was a good grant and had a good chance. And when they discussed it, whoever the liaison from the Congress basically said, Congress isn't going to support anything that has to do with congressional papers, because we don't want to say that money's coming toward, that we're granting money to help Congress and congressmen with their own papers. And totally killed it. And I'm sure that's the same. But
it has.
Maybe recently, it's a little bit better, but it wasn't back then.
Very recently, there's been what we now call congressional directed spending.
Okay.
That's an earmark.
Yeah.
For the preservation and especially the access
to.
But again, that individual's perspective was to help the senators, where we're archivists, we're saying no, this is to help the public.
help the public and to help us deal with all this stuff.
Right, because
The immense amount of material.
most congressional collections do not come with large grants of money.
No.
To
Yeah.
process and maintain. There are
Senator
obviously
McCain
some.
has been very. I know that this is after my time, but ASU
Sure.
Library had a McCain archivist that I believe was, I could be wrong, again I don't know, was at least partially funded by the senator's office, or by the Senate after the senator.
Right.
And I think they're still there, but anyway, at that point, there was not a willingness to fund institutions that were taking care of congressional papers.
What was yours or the library's role in closing Senator Goldwater's office down, and then obviously with Senator McCain, who came in subsequent to that?
Not I'm trying to honestly I don't remember on Goldwater. Rhodes and well, obviously Hayden, but Rhodes was already at ASU when I got there. I got to know the senator or excuse me, the congressman. Senator McCain, when I first knew him, was when he was in when he was in the House.
Right.
And so I had a little. Again, when I would go to D.C., I would make stops with the offices that I knew we had connections with. So again, I would stop to see Congressman Rudd and Senator McCain. And when I first went, again, you will know this. The first time I went, the senator was still in the House, and that was when the Republicans were in the minority. And as the first term, he had an office that was probably, including where his secretary was, his AA was, and where his was not as large as this living room, which is not very large, and it was tiny.
The hole in the wall.
As you know, for a first-term congressman in the minority, they're closets basically.
They're lucky they don't have a room at the YMCA.
Yeah, and one time when I went, by the time he was in the Senate, I remember going one time, and he was in the basement of Russell. Very nice office, and as you know, they have they're in the basement, but they have windows. They have the light comes in and whatever, and he's. And so I'm in the senator's office, and he's sitting behind this great desk, and he said, "You see that window?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Bulletproof glass." And he said, "Yeah, this used to be this used to be Ted Kennedy's office." And it had bulletproof glass because it was Ted Kennedy's office.
Just in case.
Just in case, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
probably a story you didn't know.
I did not know that. No,
And Senator was close to Senator Kennedy.
Right. I mean, he had many friends across the spectrum.
I was very good person to meet. I enjoyed him. Again, didn't know him very well, but obviously, probably saw him 2 or 3 times.
Did the reality match like Senator Goldwater? The reality match the image you saw on television?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, straightforward. Would speak his much nicer person, in my opinion. But maybe don't quote me on that. Senator Goldwater was he was a patrician. He was an Arizona patrician. His family was, one of the early leading families in the state. Originally, his uncle, who he very much admired, was a Democrat. his uncle Morris, and again his father, had Goldwater's, which is one of the, when I moved here, was one of the major department stores, he was famous. Goldwater started in Phoenix City Council, and then ran in, well, you know all this, ran in 52, which was the bellwether year for the Republican Party in Arizona. Howard Pyle, who ASU also had Governor Pyle's papers, so he was elected with Governor Pyle, and I can't remember whether John Rhodes was in 52 or not. I know he was elected in the 50s, but anyway, there was basically a sweep for the Republican Party on the Eisenhower coattails.
Right.
And so that's how the senator got into the Senate.
Well, what prompted your career change from archives to libraries?
Well,
there in the 90s.
Again, I came to ASU. In the 90s. Well, that's a good question. And being an administrator is not a fun job. In any sense, in any organization probably. And one of the interesting things about particularly being someone that was in an archival program or special collections or whatever, there is the tension between the university librarian and the head of special collections. There can be a tension between those two people. And this was not specifically why, but they're difficult things to manage, basically. And I got to a point where I just didn't want to do it anymore. And again, one of the things that's interesting, both from an archival and a manuscript standpoint, is that in an archive, and if you're in a special collections or manuscript collection or whatever that's administratively in a library, university library, you're at best a mid-manager. But you're dealing with people, in many cases, that even the university librarian isn't allowed to deal with. And there were people that I dealt with, donors and whatever, that myself, the head of the ASU Foundation, and the president were basically the only ones allowed to even talk to these people. And it can create some friction within a library setting where, you're basically just another librarian or a library professional. But you're doing, it can be difficult.
Sure.
And,
I understand.
Yes, and it just got to the point where I didn't enjoy it, to be honest. And I was very, very pleased that the university librarian I said, if you want to move, what would you want to do? And I said, well, I've always wanted to be I started. While I was still at Wayne, before I got my job at University of North Dakota, for about 6 months, I was the night reference librarian at Mary Grove College, which was a small Catholic college in Detroit, run by Immaculate Heart of Mary sisters. Great little college. It's no longer there, unfortunately, but was a really good, I enjoyed it. They had a great little library. I enjoyed being a reference librarian. And anyway, I ended up moving over to reference and still being a subject specialist / bibliographer.
Okay. So you
That's how I ended up being a history librarian, is that because I had the background,
Right.
that's what I did. So, and I enjoyed it very much.
I assume it's like any time you make lateral moves within an organization, you enjoy both, but for different reasons.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, as you said earlier, you retired in 2001. But how have you kept your foot, so to speak, or your toe, so to speak, in the manuscript?
Well, and you mentioned manuscript. I really haven't, although again, where I've kept my at ASU is my probably my best friend in the area is a history professor. I have my two closest friends still at ASU are history professors, and so I've been friends with them, and they keep me a little bit aware of what's going on. And again, emeritus, so I still have my ASU email account, and I still get the stuff from the university. For some reason,
how lucky.
Yeah, I probably still get. I swear, and when this one surprised you, I probably still get from vendors 10 to 15 emails a day that I just delete.
The folks at Hollinger are relentless.
That they have no idea nor do they care that I've left. I haven't been there for this point now, 5 years, 4 years, whatever. And many of them I wasn't even involved with what they were saying. So anyway, I still get those. I said I probably still get at least 15, 20 ASU emails. I still get, for some reason, I was on I served 2 terms on the University Senate. I still get the Senate dashboard for some bizarre reason, and I hadn't even been on the Senate. I think my last term was in maybe 18. I don't even remember. So probably at least 4 to 6 years before I even retired. But anyway, so I still get that. And as I said, I have friends at ASU, and I mentioned when we're done, I'll just show you.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I'm going up with my best friend, Professor Barnes. His son is at NAU. And again, I'm actually donating to NAU Library I collect or have collected hiking trail guides.
Okay.
And I have about 1,000 from all over. I'll show it. We'll go into my office and I'll show you.
Yeah.
But so I'm donating. I said, do you want any? And because U of A has NAU has great collections dealing with the Grand Canyon and basically hiking and outdoor activity, and they have more of an outdoor activity. I think they have a recreation masters, or they have more of a program than ASU has. So I offered some to NAU first, and I have a good relationship with Peter. And so they sent me a list of titles that they were interested in, and so I'm going to take the first box up tomorrow with Andrew and of stuff that I'm donating.
From archivist to donor, it's full circle.
Well, and collector, again, I don't know whether you collect anything, but what do you collect?
Football cards.
Really? Okay.
And that really grew out of, as a kid, baseball cards, because I was much more of a baseball fan growing up, St. Louis Cardinals fan.
My friend Andrew Barnes is from St. Louis and is a huge from St. Louis and is a huge Cardinal fan. And I still will occasionally tweak him about the Tigers in '68 when they beat
series.
When Mickey Lelich beat Bob Gibson, who may have been the scariest pitcher in all of baseball history.
I think you could say the scariest man in
baseball.
Yes.
And that was I can remember. I was my freshman. It was my freshman year at Michigan, and you didn't have TVs in the dorm in your room or anything, and so most of the people were from, obviously in the dorm were from Michigan, but the two RAs, resident, whatever you call them, ended up being from St. Louis.
Oh.
And so all they would talk about
Poor
was the Cardinals, and they're going to kill the Tigers and whatever. And that Game 7, we all were in the lounge, and literally you could literally hear a pin drop for most of the entire game until Kurt Flood hit till when Jim Northrup hit the triple that went over Flood's head as he came in and then had to go out, and the entire lounge erupted. I mean, just erupted.
There's a lesson for young ball players. You can always come in. You can never go back.
Yeah.
Always stay back.
Yes.
But
yes, exactly. And that's absolutely true. I didn't play baseball, but I loved watching. My parents' best friend was the team doctor for the Tigers.
Really?
And Dr. Livingood. And so, 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, his box, to give you an idea, again, this is obviously an old Tiger stadium. Mm-hmm. And his box was next to the Tiger dugout on third base side. And the box behind him was the mayor of Detroit. And the box next to him was Henry Ford's box. To give you an idea of
rarefied air.
And I can remember at least one game where Lee Iacocca was, when he was still president at Ford, was in the Ford box.
Oh my God.
Yeah. and so anyway, my parents would go at least 3 or 4 games a year in Tiger Stadium.
Well, I would be remiss not to add that the Cardinals did defeat the Detroit Tigers in 2006. Yes, 2006.
Sure, go ahead.
4-1.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic series. I was in college that year, so I got to experience that one. Ed, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have,
half
absolutely.
as much as I have.
Yes,
so.
excellent.